Sharing stories from the edge where the healing begins.
Welcome to another edition of the Operative podcast, a podcast aimed at raising awareness for mental health amongst emergency services and the veterans community. If you haven't already, please go to the YouTube channel and give the channel a subscribe. It helps getting the messages out there that we're trying to push, and I really, really appreciate it. Without further ado, today's guest is former spy, current body language analysis and best-selling author, Gavin Stone. Hi, Gav, how are you doing?
Hello, mate. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
No dramas at all. The pleasure's all mine. Thank you for taking the time to come on. I always appreciate it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of hearing your story and journey. What I like to do with all the podcasts, Gavin, start at the beginning, get a bit of a background of the guest, where they grew up, what they was like as a kid, and kind of the journey that they took in life and kind of their life story. So yeah, over to you. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Costa del Wolverhampton, in the West Midlands. My story is a little bit different to most people who work in intelligence, where they kind of have the traditional Eton or Oxford or Cambridge upbringing with rich parents and blah blah blah. I wasn't that. I was a council estate kid, where it was a rough estate. If you had all your teeth, they called you a wimp. And it was one of those worlds where you either grew up amongst a pretty bad element of society and ended up going down that path yourself. And in the West Midlands, I mean, you've probably been there. There's a hell of a lot of crime, and people are either involved in it or on the fringes of it, and it's something that it's so very, very easy to go down that wrong route. And that's where most people go, or they go the other way and they say, not for me, I'm out of here, I'm going to do something different with my life. And I started down the first path, and I started going down the route of doing things I shouldn't, or being on the fringes of things I shouldn't, and people I shouldn't be hanging around with. It was good in some senses because I learned a lot. But eventually I had a few close calls, and I thought, I don't want this. This isn't the side of the fence I want to be on. And I decided to move away, and that was when my life changed entirely.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from. It depends on where you grow up. It is easy for people coming out of school to kind of get in with the wrong crowd and go down sort of the wrong route. And the hardest bit probably is taking that kind of step away. I was very, very similar in myself. Young age, not really a lot of opportunity, and that's why I decided to make the step to join the military. So I kind of relate to kind of where you're coming from. So what chose the kind of, was it something you planned on, the career path that you went into, or did you kind of stumble into it? Because it is an interest in which we'll get on to, but how did you end up going down that route?
So, I again, just like everything in my life, it was all backwards. I mean, there's absolutely nothing that happened pretty much by design or the way it normally would. So most people, again, they go to these high-end colleges, they get a tap on the shoulder and say, hey, would you like to come and work in intelligence, and or something along those lines. And I did it totally reverse. I started off in the private sector, in process serving for a private investigator, and even that was accidental. A friend of mine who knocked on my door one day, he just said, look, Gav, I know you're such a resourceful guy. Can you help me with something? I said, sure, what is it? He said, I'm trying to find somebody. He says, I've got a name, I've got an old address, and, can you? And I said, yeah, why not? And it wasn't long. We got we found the particular individual. He gave him the envelope that he was paid to give him, walked away, and that was it, and job done. Now, I thought nothing more of it, just a favour for a friend. And then just after the start of the month, he came round with a big envelope full of cash. He said, there you go. I said, what's this? He said, that's your half. He said, you know that fellow we found? I said, yeah. He said, we were process serving, and that's your half for doing the job. And I looked at this envelope full of cash, and I'm like, got any more of them people you want finding?
I like it.
So that was where I started getting into the bread and butter stuff of, like, I went down from private investigations and process serving into marital affairs, and then fraud investigations. The fraud investigations then led to government contracts where I was working, and this is where I get hated for anybody on benefits that was fraudulently claiming and that kind of thing. And that's got a few funny stories as well. And then just working my way through different departments. And I started doing a lot of missing people stuff. I started doing penetration testing, and that was when I got into the military side of things. And then just by fluke and rubbing shoulders with the right people, it got noted that I was good at what I did, and I managed to get in the right room at the right time and say, "Hey, can I help out with this?" And before you know it, I'm doing covert surveillance for some of the intelligence agencies, and that it just escalated from there. And it wasn't something I ever realized I was good at something until usually at the end of the time of doing it. They're like, "Oh, you're pretty good at that. Do you want to try this?" And I'm like, "Am I? Oh, okay, yeah, why not?" So I'd go to the next thing and the next thing, and then, like I say, ultimately ended up in human intelligence gathering, which in itself is a whole new field and a whole new ball game, but a wonderful, amazing world. The only thing is, I describe it as a bit of a magic trick. Because for most people, they're like, wow, intelligence and spy stuff and all that cool stuff. But the truth of the matter is, just like a magic trick, when you know how it really works, it's actually a bit disappointing.
Ah, yeah, that kind. Yeah, no, I can imagine that. Once you know the kind of you're on the inside, and a lot of these kind of things that they're kind of obviously glamorized, aren't they, by the kind of Hollywood and the spy game, and a bit like yourself, I did touch on the surveillance side of stuff for quite a while with the marital stuff, and some stuff for BBC Rogue Traders and stuff like that.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and what people don't understand with surveillance, again, it sounds very alley, as the kind of paras call it, very kind of interesting. But the reality is you could be sat in a vehicle or in a covert position for many hours, can't you? Kind of observing, and sometimes not a lot happens.
Yeah. And I've said it so many times, and I've done it myself. I've been sat in a car, windows down a crack so the car doesn't steam up. Sometimes with my little 12-volt hairdryer, because you can't have the engine running to stop the front windscreen steaming up, and you're there, and you've eaten all your packed lunch, and you got a numb bum, and you're sat in the driver's seat still, and you've had, after 1.7 litres of desperation from your thermos flask, you're bursting for the loo. And I used to have a huge milk bottle or pop bottle or something that I used to nickname the ensuite. And you screw the cap off and you think, right, I haven't got long. You're waiting for ages for somebody to come out of a front door just so you can get a photograph. And hours and hours and hours and hours and nothing and nothing. And the minute you've unscrewed the cap off the ensuite, and you've pulled your jeans down and it's dark and you start the stream flowing, that's when that front door opens and you're like, no, not now.
Of course, always.
So why is these pictures at an angle? You don't want to know.
But they're like some of them. Did you do like the cohabitation kind of cases and stuff where you're trying to prove that someone lives in an address? And like, see, you've just got to get that one photo. You might get one opportunity in like a 5 or 6 hour window, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, this is where, especially if I had several cases at once, what I'd be doing, and it was sometimes the case when I had multiple going, and maybe this is why people said, you're as good as what you are, because I could do 5, 6, 7 all at the same time quite easily. And what I would do, the most important thing is try and establish when that person leaves of a morning. That way, rather than sitting there from 2 in the morning, waiting 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and eventually at 8 o'clock in the morning they drive off. I used to do a little trick. I get the watch, take the strap off, and it has to be a wind-up watch, analog, not a digital watch. Take the strap off, and I just pop it. If I knew the vehicle that the guy was driving, I'd pop it under the rear tyre where it was out of sight on the passenger side. And what had happened is the car would drive off, and you'd go and pick up the broken watch later, and it'd be smashed and crushed. But if the fingers were pressed down at 7:10, that was what time he leaves the house. So then you pop down the next morning, you're there for 7:10, you wait about 20 minutes, he comes out, he gets into his car about 5 past, you go, click, job done, and you drive away again. It saved you a lot of time.
The trade, eh?
No, so it's all these little old school tricks. People think that they're going about gadgets and tech and all these things, and sometimes it's the old school stuff you know, the little note wedged in the door frame and things like that. And again, I've had a similar thing like that where I was trying to catch somebody on his way to work each and every morning, and I couldn't understand why he kept evading me. And it was just because he was going through the back gate. And the way I found out was just wedging a bit of twig in the back gate. And, you know, and when I went round it, had dropped it, had gone. So I couldn't watch both sides at once. And I'd made the mistake of only watching the front. So that was how I found out he was leaving through the back gate and down the back alley. So, you know, like I say, it's just... It's all these old school things that, you know, yes, it's great having the tech and all the satellite stuff, but it's expensive having all that lot, and you can do it with a twig. Why not?
Absolutely, you know, and I think it's about having that situational awareness, isn't it? That's massively important. And, you know, if you go back when I was doing surveillance, probably similar to you years ago, you know, the technology really wasn't kind of there, you know. Now there's all sorts of different things you can have, like these nature cameras that you could probably set up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's about rocking up and doing. There's no, you know, as they say, it's kind of there's no time wasted. I can't remember the saying, but when you do a recce, you know, when you do a recce of something and you do that pre-planning, it really, really does kind of, it's good stuff to do, isn't it? So you can get the information that you need.
Oh, definitely. And of course, I mean, I you know, I'm going back to when I used to do. We had film cameras, you know, so you didn't know until the film was developed whether you'd even got the shot. You know, I mean, this was way before digital cameras. If back then we had what I've got access to now, like drones and you know, and all these other things. Dear me, I'd have saved myself some time and some aggro having to do some of the stunts I'd have had to do just to get a photo, you know. So yeah, it's amazing how technology kind of changes everything. But at the same time, I don't miss it. I do miss it, but I wouldn't go back to it. I wouldn't want to go back to it, you know. And I'm sure it's the same for you, you know. You ex-para, you know, you've probably got fond memories. You know, but you go back to that old, oh, if it's not raining, it's not training. You'd be like, I'm sure at the time you were like, oh, what am I doing?
I like the finer things in life now and a bit more comfort as opposed.
Yeah.
The thought of me, a 20-year-old me, kind of living in a kind of shelf scrape in Brecon or on Salisbury Plain in February really does put a fear. In fact, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. And no, it's not for me anymore. No. Yeah. So yeah, you've gone from kind of, so you really have started at the kind of the I don't know, mean this disrespectfully because I was the same. It's like I turned up for a surveillance company, gave them a CV, and they're like, okay, when do you want to start? And I started off by putting trackers on vehicles and stuff, in the middle of the night and things like that. So how did you know, you work your way up, and how, if you don't mind, can you talk about some of the agencies that you've worked for and how you got into them, if that's okay?
Yeah, so where it all started was I used to do some of the penetration testing gigs, and this would be really. I mean, it started with private clients with me that I'd get hired to do pen testing. And for anybody who doesn't know what that is this is different to the current stuff now that they're doing online with these pen testing, like your website and security and cyber stuff and whatever else. This was good old fashioned getting into buildings or compounds or military bases or houses or whatever the case may be, physically breaking in or entering or accessing these places, and then saying how you did it and where the weak spots are, and with a report that how they can be improved, etc. So this is what I used to do, and again, it used to be private clients. It was something I got the hang of, and again, this was something that all the lock-picking stuff that I learned, all the bypassing stuff that I learned, you know, cameras and alarms and all this wonderful stuff and blah, blah, blah. And I never did learn how to rappel a rope, by the way. So, but all the like the bits with the paper clips or the lock-picks and whatever else, most of that was completely bloody useless because the majority of the time, all I had to do was stand in the smoke shelter, have a cigarette, and somebody would hold the door open for me on the way into the building thinking I was just going back in and I was an employee. And and this is what I'm saying to you, it's generally disappointing when you know the reality of it all. And yeah, there were times when I did have to use lockpicks or different bypassing things and whatever else. But like I say, the majority of the time, it was really, really simple. There was one particular company, they hired me to they were seriously security conscious. They'd heard about me through the grapevine, and they used to have their employees there would be texted an OTP, a one-time PIN on the morning for getting into work, and they would have to enter that OTP, get into the building. The electronic door would only let one person through at a time, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they'd gone to extremes to keep the building as secure as they possibly could. And they hired me and they said, do you think you can do it? Yeah, no problem. Why not? I'll have a look. And so I got down there, I got outside the door, and I'd done my due diligence. I'd done a lot of research, and I'd picked about 4 random employees that I could get as much information on as I could, because I'd got an idea of how I was going to get into the building. I thought, what I'll do, I'll pretend to be one particular employee, and I'll kind of make sure I get there before he does, and I'll ring them up and I'll say I'll make up a name, John Smith. Can you let me in, please? And of course, I mean, I'd learned his date of birth, and I'd learned his place of birth. I'd learned his mother's maiden. I'd got all this stuff because I thought they're bound to ask all this. And I rang up and I said, "Hi, I'm John Smith." I said, I've deleted the text and I don't know my OTP. Can you give me another one?" They said, "Yeah, it's 1234." I said, "Brilliant, thank you." And I beep, 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 beep. And I was in the building, and that was it. They never asked me for anything, not a thing. Couldn't believe it. They just took it at face value and let me in the building. So sorry, I've digressed a little bit, but to answer your question, what that resulted in was becoming pretty proficient in, getting into places. And I forgot the name of the operation, but there was a particular operation that the MOD was doing at the time, and it was getting into military bases with, you got no Mod 90, you got no contacts on the inside, you got very, very little. You were just told, go to this particular barracks, get in, tell us how you get out, and then tell us how you did it, or whatever the case may be. So I kind of put myself forward for it, and they said, "Yeah, give it a go. Why not?" And again, this is my little claim to fame here. Irrelevant to where it is, there's never been a building, compound, installation, military base, whatever. There's never been one that I've failed to get into, which in itself has created a few problems as well. But I'll tell you more about that some other time. And I got into all of them, every single one of the military camps and that kind of thing that I was hired to get into. Got into every single one, and I told them all how I did it. And somebody somewhere must have paid attention, because they looked and went, "This guy's pretty good." And then the next thing you know, they started looking at me for other stuff for the Ministry of Defence. So I did a lot of work for the MOD. That ended up then going over to intelligence, and it started with, like I say, just the basic stuff like covert surveillance, or like yourself, like planting trackers and that kind of thing, or listening devices, and eventually built up to human intelligence. I actually spent more time as a contractor than I did on the books for the Ministry of Defence, and I've done 2 or 3 different positions for the MOD. But the majority of my career has actually been freelance, so I've worked for other allied governments as well, including the Americans and others that I'm not really happy about sharing.
Well, I thought that with your kind of your history and your kind of work that you've done, some of it might be a bit like, you won't want to mention. But going back to like the penetration testing there, I assume, again, I can relate in certain, not necessarily the penetration testing as such, but like how you have to be kind of come up with sort of thinking a little bit out the box. And kind of being a bit ingenuity and trying to how to, and then half the time people are just, and I always say to people, when you're following people go, "Well, I'd know if I was being followed." Most people haven't got a clue that they're being followed, and even if you're not 2 cars behind, or even if you're not doing it properly, people do not notice, do they?
The majority of the time they don't, and there are other methods where you don't necessarily need to follow somebody. If somebody, and this is, I mean, in my training, obviously, we were taught to take different routes to the same destination and blah, blah, blah. And of course, most people don't do that. People are creatures of habit. So if they drive to work or school or wherever, wherever their commute is daily, they generally take the same route. And that's one of their biggest downfalls, because all you've got to do is sit on the street where they live and watch which way they drive out the street, because guaranteed the next day, that's the direction they're going to take. So you wait at the end of the street next time, and next time you watch them and get to the end of their street and they turn right. So the next day you go further down that street where they've turned right to where they've got to make a decision, left, right, or whatever. And you, piece by piece, you can put the journey together. And before you know it, you've got the whole thing. You don't need to follow them if you've just got the patience to spend 10 or 15 minutes on the morning watching the next bit of the journey complete itself and you know and work it out from there. Because they usually 99% of the time will take the exact same route. People shop at the same supermarkets. People use the same. You know, people just get comfortable with what they know. It's it's a psychological kind of area of the brain that just goes, we know this, we're happy with this, so we're going to go back there again, and that's how it. And not only that, people are inherently lazy. They don't want to start searching new routes or driving the long way or whatever else or trying new things when they've got something that works. They like to stick to it.
Yeah, no, that's true as well. I think now as well, people are that heads in phones that I feel like I don't obviously touch on that side of work anymore. But I mean, I feel like following someone on foot now, with a phone, when someone's looking at the phone, I think it'd just be easy because people, you probably, you would have seen it. People have
Oh
their heads in their phones constantly. And I just think they wouldn't have a clue if you were
yeah,
following them for miles upon miles on foot into shops, round shopping centres, because they're just totally oblivious.
yeah.
And it scares me, having done various surveillance courses, not comparing myself to the level of training you've had, obviously, but like you become a little bit more situational aware and you clock things. And I don't think that's a bad thing. My kind of missus always finds it quite funny, but I'm sure you do that as well when you're out and about. You're aware of your
Oh
surroundings. Just
yeah.
because of the current climate and the current world we live in, we all know about recent terrorist attacks, and
Mhm.
let's be honest, you never know when one might be coming. So I just think that's a good skill to have.
Oh yeah, I mean, I teach my daughter all this stuff because I mean, I see young kids when I say kids now, we're talking anything from like kind of 10 to 25 at the minute, I think, and the hoodies up, AirPods and things in, blocking out all the sound, vision very limited because they've got their hood up, facing a phone, walking down the street, and you think, actually, have you ever seen that YouTube? And I don't know if it's genuine or not. I'll have to check it out one day and have a closer look. But there are that many, there's loads and loads of clips of people walking into lampposts or falling down manholes that have been left open because they're on their phone. They're walking on autopilot, and yeah, they're just completely oblivious to everything that's going on around them. I've taught my daughter, if you're going to use earphones, use one. And pick the same ear every time. Don't have a hoodie up if you can help it. Keep your head on a swivel. And I've taught her ways to do it without it being obvious. I mean, we go into restaurants or anywhere now. She knows where I want to sit. She's 12 years old. And I'll say, right, where are we sitting? She'll go over there because it's by that exit. You can see the room. She'll go, and I'm thinking, brilliant. That's my girl. And this, a lot of this kind of subconscious training, as it were, started from when she was little. We used to play the motorbike game in the car, and we just used to have points for who spotted the most motorbikes when we were on a long journey, and that helps not only people with motorbikes, for her when she's growing older and driving, to be more aware of them, and it's ingrained into her, but just to be more situationally aware. And then when she was a little bit older, we played something called the silly plate game, and we'd look at the license plate of the car behind us, and we'd have to make a silly word out of the last three letters on the plate. And if the car changed, basically you get a point if you spotted the same car twice, and then if you spotted it three times, you won the round. But it's just three different times in three different areas and locations. Not like kind of we've turned a corner and it's followed us again. So we had this whole thing, and we try and it make it fun to make these silly words up out of the kind of last three letters or whatever letters were available and that kind of thing. And she enjoyed it. And of course, it made her, every time the car changed, different car, what's the plate? And blah, blah, blah. And she'd try and look for that car that we'd seen earlier again and see if you come up twice, she's like, oh, yeah, I've won this round. And, so, and of course, these little things, we go out now, she's constantly aware of whether the same car's behind us for a while and things like that. It's just inbuilt into her.
No, that's a good skill to have. And again, because of the current climate we live in, the threats that we face, and obviously people having their heads in social media and not being aware, and teach that from a young age to be situational aware. Now, I think this goes a long way into various careers. Careers in the police, careers in the fire, all sorts of stuff like that. Because I come across people all the time that just aren't situationally aware, aren't aware of bumping into people or seeing the same face several times when you're out and about. I'll be like, oh, that's the guy we saw the other week at such and such, or my missus, or someone I'm with, will go,
Yeah.
I don't know that. And you're like, well, you just become a bit more aware. And like I say, I think it's a brilliant skill to teach young
Well,
kids. Kids
yeah,
and
that's great for when you're in the car. And I mean, the one we play, if we're walking around the city, I mean, we've lived in Miami, we've lived in Arizona, we've lived in London, we've lived all over the place. Obviously the kind of work I've done has had me traveling all over the world. So when we were living in Miami, one of the games we used to play a lot was something that I nicknamed Mood Stone. Just because of the play on our names, Laura Stone and what we'd do is we'd be walking around the city and I'd say, right, we're going to play Mood Stone. And she'd say, okay. And the first person we'd see, like walking towards us, she would have to guess who they are, what they do, and what kind of mood they're in and why. So it might be an executive in a suit who's pacing and whatever else. And she'd look at him and go, oh, he's kind of, it looks like he's got an executive job. It looks like he's annoyed because something's gone wrong and blah, blah, blah. And then, it might be somebody who's pottering and she'd say, oh, I reckon they're on vacation and, they're just kind of. And what it did, it helped to get her into the frame of mind when she'd see somebody and look at him and go, I don't know what mood he's in, but something's not right. That man looks out of place. He's Hawkeye watching me, and he's kind of, he's not smiling, he's not expressing anything, he's staring at me. I don't feel comfortable, and I want to know why. And she'd talk to me about this, and I go, yeah, I don't like the way that particular gentleman's looking at you either. Right? What would you do in this situation? And all this forward planning helps her, even psychologically think, well, all right, if I was here without Daddy, what would I do? And these are great games for anybody to play with your kids, but make it a bit fun and make it a bit funny. Make it a bit daft and make it enjoyable. Don't go too serious with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really, really good tip for the viewers, actually, like with the kids, because it's an interesting thing. And I used to do the same sort inadvertently with the kids, and they kind of spot who different types of lorries. Right, I'll try and the Audi lorries, see who wins, the little lorries and stuff like that, when they were a bit younger. So again, it's just making them a bit more aware, and I like that you can kind of teach them, and it's a life skill, isn't it? I genuinely believe that is a life skill. So yeah, moving forward, you've obviously sort of penetration testing and stuff. So yeah, moving on to the government. You work for the British government.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff was this when you kind of got into? Because what I'm interested to talk about as well, a bit further down the line, is obviously the kind of body language analysis, because I find that, and I'm very conscious of sat here. I'm like, is he analysing?
No. So I'll put
a weirdo of some description.
No, so what I'll do, I'll put you at ease a little bit there, just to help you out. So I explained this when you're walking down the street and you see a newspaper stand and you see the spread with all the different newspapers on. Just because you have the ability to read every single headline, every single article, every single price of every single newspaper, every word, every letter, doesn't mean you want to, and doesn't mean you see the newspapers, but you're not concentrating on reading all of it. You don't care. Right, unless there's some headline or picture that really catches your eye or attention, you go, oh, that's a bit weird, or or whatever. Turns out Keir Starmer's an alien or whatever. You go, huh? But unless there's something that really stands out, the majority of the time you just see a bunch of newspapers, and that's how I look at people. If I sat there or walked down the road analysing and looking at every single person, it just drives me nuts. So. Yeah, you've got to learn to switch it off and just get on with your life, and when you are wanting to, you then switch it on again. I mean, again, you're ex-military, so you know this kind of thing. Yes, you walk around with a certain, awareness, as it were. But you don't necessarily, you're not in combat mode 24/7. Let's put it that way, So
No, you're not switched on all the time. I like to be aware of my surroundings, and it depends on where you're going, doesn't it? As well, I tend to be way more switched on. Not when I'm wandering around the village that I live in, but when I go out into big cities on a Saturday night, which is very rare now because I'm 45. And by 8 o'clock, I've got my slippers on and I'm watching a box set. But if I do go out into big cities, I'm more aware, especially when I'm down in London in the capital. I've recently been down there on a course, and I was very aware of my surroundings coming through King's Cross and on the tube, and I don't think that's being paranoid. I just think again, just paying attention to why has that person put a bag there? Why have they,
Mm.
little things. And it may sound a bit corny, but I think some attention to detail like that may save your life at some point,
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually went down to do a visit to London not so long back, and I was on one of the trains, and this girl who didn't raise any alarms whatsoever, a student girl, got on the train, sat a couple of seats down to me, put a backpack next to her, and then the train was stationary, doors were still open, and she then left her backpack and ran off the train, and I thought, oh, what the hell? That's not right, And of course, my eyes are then glued, and I'm looking at the backpack. I'm looking around to see if anybody else has, and everybody's heads in their phone, completely oblivious. And I saw her run across the platform. I thought, holy, what's happening here? And all it was, she ran across to take the chewing gum out of her mouth, put it in the trash can, and then run back onto the train again. I was like, oh, okay, that one made me pucker. So of course, sometimes you don't necessarily have to be in that fully switched on mode all the time, but sometimes something happens that is abnormal, and again, the whole presence of the presence of the abnormal, absence of the normal. You think something's not right, and it grabs your attention. So, but yeah, sorry, I know you wanted to get back into the government stuff. So yeah, where this went on from the MOD to start getting into kind of intelligence jobs, I was asked if I wanted to do a couple of what should have been simple jobs, and I basically got a feeling I was getting stiffed, and I was going to be a fall guy. So and I took it into account, and I managed to successfully navigate through the jobs and do what they wanted me to do without ending up in prison or dead. Is the very short version of it. And what happened was then again they must have recognised something and said, okay, this guy obviously seems to be reasonably good at what he does, kind of thing. Let's kind of test him out. So one of the very first assignments that I was given, and again, I was still Hollywood educated at this time, and it was still a case of I expected to get called into an ops room and there's a slideshow and kind of, this is the mastermind criminal we want, this is the island he lives on, you're going to be parachuted in and blah blah blah, and and I was thinking all these things, maybe at the end of it all they'll start passing me files and phone will start ringing and Q will give me a watch that explodes and all this crap, and instead what I got was actually very, very different. I got sat in a room. My assignment was given to me in one sentence. And they said, find out how Russia is getting railgun information out of Korea. And that was it. And I waited for the phones and the gadgets. And instead, what I got was, what the hell are you still doing here? I was like, oh, okay then. Not really much to go on. Cheers, gents. And that was it. I was almost escorted out the building and told, crack on with it. And 2 or 3 days later, I went back with the information for them. I said, there you go, job done. This is how it's happening. And they were like, okay, looks like you are pretty good at what you do. And that was when I was kind of not officially, but kind of invited into the fold. That's when they accepted and said, all right, okay, let's actually give you some good stuff now. So, and for most people, the majority of people might be given an assignment like that. They'll go, well, where the hell do you start? How do you get that kind of thing?
Yeah, I was going to ask that question. Where do you start when you're given that limited kind of information?
Well, so for me, I was thinking about it as I walked home, and I thought, right, okay, if I was hired myself, or I was working for a foreign intelligence agency or something like that to get railgun information out of, so I put myself in the shoes of the Russian. If I was hired, what would I do? And I thought, well, to start with, I'd want to find myself a railgun expert because they're the guys who are going to be able to give me the information. So again, a little bit of research, doesn't take me long. This isn't like ex-McDonald's workers. There's not billions of them. There's actually a very, very short list of railgun experts. So what I then did was, right, okay, that very short list can get even shorter if I look how many of them are in Korea. And then I narrowed it down even more. And then I'm like, okay, now I've got an even shorter list. Let's look into these people and see, what they're doing and who with and whatever else. And after a little bit of research, I managed to find out that there was one particular guy who'd he published an article, and when I read the article, I went right down to the bottom, and his co-author of the article, and I won't say his name, but it was a Russian name. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So then I looked into him, and he had ties to the Russian embassy and blah blah blah. And I thought, okay, let's see if we can start piecing this together. So I looked at this railgun expert, I looked at this Russian guy with ties to the embassy, I looked at the work they'd done together, and the more I investigated, and again, a lot of this was done from my living room, and then I made a few phone calls to get some confirmation of certain facts, put all the pieces together, and took the information back to the agency that hired me. That's all I'm going to say at this point. And then I presented the information to them. I told them where and why I got how I'd got it backed up, how I'd got it confirmed, etc., etc. And again, these are methods that I can't publicly disclose. I'm giving you as much as I probably can by still being a bit nebulous, but I apologise for that. But obviously, there's reasons. And they looked at it all and they went okay, and then they checked it out and it was right, and that was it, and that was how it ended up with that particular Russian being deported, and it cut the flow of railgun information going to Russia. So yeah,
the railgun. What's that?
So a railgun, it literally is what it says it is. If you can imagine. Let's imagine you've got a city with a great big wall around it, and if you've got like turrets with 4 fixed guns, that they can only shoot in a certain amount of direction and whatever else. Now, if you're getting attacked from this side and you've only got these 2 weapons and they're both been taken up, but then there's more coming out from this direction. And again, I'm realizing we're on a podcast, so it's difficult to kind of explain this for the people who are only listening. But those particular guns would be fixed. Yes. Whereas if you've got them on a rail truck, as you know, that's propelled and whatever else, and now all of a sudden you can bring all 4 guns round to the one side, and you can now concentrate fire, and whatever else. You can basically move these weapons around on this rail in a great big circle around your city. So you can have all 4 guns on one side. You can have 4 guns in 4 different places. You can have 2 at the back, 2 at the front. Yeah. So and that's literally how it is. It's like a gun on a train that can circle around a particular area, compound, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, well, the reason I asked that is I get a lot of criticism because when I talk to people in certain industries, I do have a lot of military on. There's a lot of acronyms in the military and associated organisations. So sometimes I get a lot of criticism, comments going, ask them to explain what that acronym or what that meaning was. So that was for the reason for that. And for me as well. I did think railgun. I thought the key was in the name. But I thought I'd ask. So interesting kind of tasks are starting to be thrown your way, aren't they? So
I think to be honest with you, when I first started off, a lot of it was like kind of just give him something to shut him up, make him go away, make him realise he's bitten off more than he can chew, and then we'll never hear back from him again. And then when I kept coming back with hits rather than misses, they were like, okay, this guy might be useful. And that was when they started taking me a bit seriously and then giving me some of the better stuff. So.
Wow. So, you continued. How many years would you say you kind of do you get heavily vetted? I should imagine you would have been.
Yeah, you've got to have your security clearance, which depending on which agency you're working for, so you've got up to top secret in the UK, you've got you got all the usual stuff like sensitive and whatever, but like what the military is, but then your levels are, I think it's, what is it? Classified secret and top secret. Because they recently reached. I say recently, it's probably actually about 10 years ago now. But they recently changed it all, didn't they, to 3 levels? But then you've got that's within the military, but that then differs in the intelligence world. So you've got what they call strap files. So your strap files are the equivalent of one of probably top secret or one above top secret. And then most people who only deal with the strap files aren't usually even aware there's another level above that called strap 2. And that's like your kind of ultra top secret or whatever you would want to call it. So, but they're just called strap 2. And you've got and this varies from agency to agency. You got like within the CIA, it's you've got TSSCI, which is top secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information. So, and this is like, even though it's top secret, you will only be given a piece of the puzzle. Not you might be told get information on this person, and you're doing that particular job, but you don't know why. You don't know what it's for. You don't know the rest of the story. You know
At
nothing.
least in the know, kind of
Exactly.
more secretive it is, I guess.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, and of course, like I say, it all varies and whatever else. But the clearances I've had in the past, and of course, you know, different agencies, you get different clearances, you get psych evals, you get background checks, and blah blah blah. But even some, so you can have, say, classified clearance. And then what it'll do, say, classified clearance might allow you to know what's going on in something that's secret. And that classified clearance might also allow you to be involved in a part of an operation that's top secret. So even somebody with classified clearance technically has what they call up to top secret, and
Okay.
that's not, so you don't have access to top secret stuff, but in certain aspects you will have, you know, if something's up to top secret and they want you to know part of it, and that could be as little as being called into a room and, you know, you've got a completely redacted file apart from like your own name or something, and you just called in and you say, is that your name there? You confirm it, you go yes, and they go, okay, off you go. And that's as much as you'll ever see in a top secret file is your name printed on a redacted page, you know. So, or something very similar. I mean, that's obviously a little bit overkill, but yeah, so yeah, clearances can go, and again, job to job. I went to work for the Americans for a while. I had to go through the whole thing again with them, come back to Britain, and clearances completely gone. Had to start from the bottom again.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we know there's obviously a reason for that.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be vetted, and you know, the security clearance kind of thing's a necessity as much as it'll probably be a pain in the arse for yourself. So yeah, obviously, kind of. How did you end up kind of going across and working? Was that through working for the British agencies that you then kind of got linked and asked to go and work over in the States for various agencies?
Yeah, so I mean, you do get like joint intelligence operations as well. And what I've tend to find is, if you're working for the Americans as an outsider, they will bend over backwards and be so accommodating more than their own. And it's the same when the Americans come over to work with the British. They're like, oh, give them this, give them that, blah blah blah. You know, they get away with a lot more than we'd ever get away with. But it's the same in reverse. But what you find is, when I speak to the Americans, I say, oh, you know, the Americans, you're so great, you give so much and you do this and you really, and they're going, yeah, no, we only do that for you. If you were an actual American working here, you know, you wouldn't get half that crap. And you're like, oh, okay. And it's very much the same in Britain. So again, you know, you get to network amongst different allied agencies. You know, you work amongst all different teams and whatever else. And in this world, it's not long before you're going to come across somebody who works for the Mossad or somebody who works for DGSE or BND or whatever the case may be, and you realise you're both pursuing the same person. So what you do is you say, well, look, you know, there's no point both of us trying to do this, and there's like a bit of a professional courtesy where you say, look, do you want to take him and we'll share, or do you want me to take him and we'll share? But that in itself can have its own problems as well. So again, you know, but what you tend to do is you network, you meet people, and then before long, I mean, I was good friends with the station chief of a particular country, and he just called me up the one day and he said, "Look, you still freelance?" I said, "Yep. Can you come and help me out with something?" And that was where it all started.
Wow, simple as that, huh?
Simple as that. It's just basically, and I've said this to people, you know, the intelligent people say, "Oh, how do you get into intelligence? How do you get into intelligence?" And I said, it's quite simple: be useful. If they've got a use for you, you know, I mean, there are drone pilots in Nevada working for the CIA, and they're just civilians. And all it is that they've been given clearance, they've got all sorts of things, and they've just basically they've been good at what they do. They've proved themselves as being useful and trustworthy, and the next thing you know, they're working for the Central Intelligence Agency and you know, doing the drone piloting. You know, probably wearing a military uniform and have never been through even basic training. You know, just because the fact that they're sitting and what to them is almost like a computer game, wiggling a joystick around and flying over things, and a lot of it's surveillance more so than anything else. You know, just because they're good at what they do. There are so many things you can do to improve your chances. You know, whether you know a second language fluently, whatever. The more and more that you've got to offer, and the more you can do, and the more reliable you can make yourself. And one of my other, technically, was probably a big mistake, but one of my other bonuses was I never said no. You know, if they said, look, you know, we want you to go here, we want you to do this, and you go, okay, yeah. You know, it was like, okay, nothing was a problem. It's like, yeah, okay, send me the details, or you know, and that was it. And if it meant spending Christmas in a hellhole, then so be it.
Yeah, I think you've got to be kind of susceptible to kind of, you know, being keen. I've always said that whatever industry you go into, it helps if you're keen and you're positive. If you're well, I don't think I can do that kind of thing, and they go, that's fair enough. We'll find someone that can. Whereas if you're like,
Exactly.
yep, I'll get you the results you want, even if confidently wrong, is
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah, and that's exactly it. And what we do now, we live in a it's 5 o'clock, not my problem world.
very
And
much.
you know, there's so many staff these days are like, you know, they're clock watching at 1 minute to 5 on a Friday, and they're going, right, 1 minute and I'm out, and something can be going wrong, or the phone can be ringing or whatever, and they go, not my problem anymore. You know, 60 seconds and I'm locking the door behind me, and so nobody's willing these days to say, well, I'll do the extra mile. You know, I'll get the phone if it's an order, then I'll take it. If this needs doing, that needs doing, then I'll do it. You know, so not many people these days want to roll their sleeves up, get stuck in, and go, right, let's sort this out before I get home. And that kind of attitude, no matter where you work or what industry you work in, it does get recognised. I don't care what anyone says. People will see that you do go the extra mile, and before you know it, you know, you're getting offered more. You're getting more out of whatever position you're in.
No, absolutely. I agree with you. That was taught to me from a very young age at 17 in the military, is like,
Mm.
be a doer, you know, do what, you know, get stuff done, be the first to jump up and do something, not necessarily volunteer, you know, and they always say no one volunteers, but you know, you're the first to jump up and do some show willing, be keen. And it does get noticed, and it does go a long way. So, um, moving kind of, I don't know, kind of the direction as such, but obviously you got into kind of training kind of side of things. Was this before the body language analysis, or was this after? To give me a rough breakdown of how that.
So I did a lot of so we were trained in a lot of body language stuff anyway, and a lot of it the intelligence agencies tend to love role play. So I've done a lot of role play over the years, and they'll kind of ask you later, you know, did you spot this? Did you spot that? And then they'll go over body language tells and signs of comfort and uncomfort and that kind of thing. It's not as pushed as what I think it probably should be when it comes to deception detection. I reckon there should be probably a lesson more dedicated to it than the kind of, you know, after the role play saying, well, did you spot this and did you spot that, or you know, it's more cursory than what it is. But what it led me to do was have an interest in body language and in the cues and physical tells and that kind of thing. So it kind of built on from there. So I never got kind of qualified through the agencies or anything from it, just kind of trained in it, and then myself pushed myself to learn more. So that's how I got into the body language side of it. And that being said, there was also things that I spotted for myself when I was. So there's an order of things are done when you're going to meet somebody who, and again, the name changes from agency to agency. There could be an asset, there could be an informant, there could be an agent, or whatever. Different agencies call the asset a different thing.
Yeah.
But when you go to meet them, there's a particular order that things are done in, and one of the very first things you do is you always establish the next meeting first. So no matter what happens, if you have to exit early, if the whole thing, you know, if the plug is pulled for any particular reason, you already know when and where you're going to meet that person again. So any interruptions you don't need to worry about. So you get that out of the way first. And then there's a series of questions that you have to ask, which is just protocol, and it might be, you know, so. And again, I've got to be a little bit careful, but you'll ask these cursory questions, and it'll be like, you know, do you think you were followed on the way over here? Do you think, you know, is there anybody who might suspect what you're doing? Blah blah blah. But one of the most important questions is, has anybody else from any other intelligence agency approached you about sharing secrets? And of course, what you'll get, you'll turn around and say, right, you know, do you think anyone followed you over? And they go, no, I was watching. You go, okay. You know, do you think anybody knows what you're doing? No, nothing to worry about. And you go, has anybody approached you from any other foreign intelligence agencies? And there's one occasion it's going, no, no. And I thought, well, that's not right. That's that doesn't match the other answers, and how he answered, and his whole body language changed, his verbals changed, all these ticks and tells started flashing up. There was more red flags than a Russian airport, and I just thought, right, that's got my attention. So I left it for the moment, and I carried on the meeting as normal. And then basically what I did is I made a note saying, I think this guy's been compromised and he's been possibly turned into a double agent through another intelligence agency. And we then did the next meeting, went into a bit further, and it turned out he'd been compromised by another intelligence agency.
So was that the kind of start of your kind of fascination with body language?
Like we are trained to a small degree to look out for these things, but that was when I thought, that was really interesting. There was a definitive change. So then I started going down the path. Every time I met somebody and I asked those set questions, paying more attention, do they draw their feet in when I ask that particular one? Do they fold their arms? Do they do this? Does their blink rate go up? Does their breath location change? All these different things that are physical tells that I'm looking at and going, right, let me see what happens when I ask that particular question, and paying very close attention. And if there's no deviation from the baseline, nothing to worry about. But if something is different when I ask that question, that's when I start saying, right, okay, let's make a note of that and investigate that further.
Is it something that if you're aware of, like, you kind of studied it, you're very aware of body, and I think you're ranked 9th in the world, is that correct? As a body language analysis, which is pretty incredible considering there's about 8 or 9 billion people on the planet. So if you're aware of it from your perspective, can you, if you're on the sort of receiving end of stuff, can you kind of hide them tells, or is it really hard for someone to disguise their body language if they're lying and stuff like that?
Well, and I've tried to explain this to people before. A lot of the time, these are physiological actions that you can't necessarily stop or control. So if you think about it like this, when you make somebody jump, they naturally go, their shoulders come up and their arms kind of do it, and they do that, pull that funny, stupid face like you see on Snatch and one of the, and everybody does it, so if you make someone if you really make someone jump, their physiological reaction will be the same every single time. Right. And it's very much the same with body language. If you're watching somebody and they're telling lies, there are certain, when the cortisol starts flowing, their mouth will start drying up, their blink rate will increase, their breath location will change from the tummy to the chest. So there's certain things that will happen that they cannot control. And each one of those has a bit of a domino effect. So, for example, when their mouth starts drying up, they'll start going, and they'll start swallowing and doing different things like that. And of course, this doesn't necessarily on its own mean anything. So I mean, for me now, I'm doing a lot of talking, so my mouth's drying up. So, but so on its own isn't necessarily a lie. But if that's mixed with, at the same time they fold their arms, then their blink rate goes up, and then their breath location changes, then they pull their feet in, and then their voice changes, their eye accessing cues are different, they look down instead of looking at you, or loads and loads of other different things. If you get this cluster of tells, that's when you go, okay. Because there is no Pinocchio effect. There is no, he did this, so therefore he's lying. But if you get this cluster of tells, that is a physiological response, you can then go, right, something's definitely not right there. I need to ask a few more questions in that area. So, and you have to be really, really careful, because this is more of a fear response than a lie response. When you lie, you naturally become stressed. So these are signals for elevated stress. So again, you could be talking to somebody about a subject that they find particularly stressful, and you have to differentiate between whether it's stress signals that you're seeing or whether it's deception signals that you're seeing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. I mean, someone did say to me, like, I've got ADHD, and now I had ADHD before it was cool and before everyone decided to have it. I'm joking. I'm not taking anything away. We just get a lot of it about. I got told that ADHD, and I'm very good, I like to think, at telling someone's sort of, when you've said something to someone, and I'm in a lot of circles where you have a lot of banter, where someone took it the wrong way, and they've got a tell on their face where they've lost their temper, but they're trying. it's got. I like to think I can figure out. Everyone's got a talent of an angry face, but I do find it absolutely fascinating. And do you continue to kind of? Obviously, we'll move on to the books, but did you start training in that? Did you start training people in body language analysis?
Yeah. So yeah, what I'll do, I'll quickly revisit because I forgot to answer the question where you said about covering your own and is it difficult. So yes, it can be difficult, but there are other things you can do. So when I was going through training, what they did is they put me in an interview room with somebody. They got a camera on a tripod, and they recorded the entire conversation, which was over 3 hours long. And this entire conversation, there was no what kind of no like no really deep, stressful interrogation type questions. It was primarily conversation. And what they did is they said, right, go back and sit and watch this tape again and again and again. And they said, because you are the only person in the world who knows for definite when you are lying.
Oh yeah.
So nobody else can know for definite. We can all say, I think he's lying there, or there's indicators, but you know when you were lying because you were the one who was talking, and you know whether it's true or not. So what you do is you watch the video back, and you learn your own deceptive behaviors. And then what they do is they then say to you, so what you're going to do now is, for example, if you are somebody who lies, and when you lie, you put your hands together like that. Then what you're going to do, like in a prayer position for those who are listening, you're going to get used to randomly sticking a prayer position together when you're telling the truth. And what that's going to happen then is, you've heard the saying, what's the best place to hide a tree? In a forest. You then, if you do that prayer position when you tell a lie, but then you've also done it half a dozen times when you're telling the truth, nobody can learn to differentiate between when you're lying or being truthful. So therefore, you learn your own tells. Once you've learned your own tells, you pepper them in randomly all over the place, and that way it kind of covers you from being able to kind of being spotted when you're being deceptive or not. So I hope that answers the question a bit clearer. Sorry, mate, I digress.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what I was kind of. I suppose you answered it perfectly, because what I was getting at was whether subconsciously you can actually change that. But obviously you can, but there's an element of training, and you've got to be really focused to then know what your tell is, and then to randomly throw it again, because you're fighting against your subconscious, aren't you?
That's right, yeah. And of course, when you tell a lie, you've got to do 3 things. Because number one is, if somebody asks you, were you at this place last night at 8:00? The first thing that's going to happen in your brain is the word yes is going to go ping. So number one, you're going to go, right, let's hold that back. We don't want that getting out. Number two, you've then got to make up or fabricate a lie, which will keep it simple. In this case, is just no. So that's the second thing you're doing. And then the third thing you're doing is you're then delivering that no while still trying to hold that yes back. In a believable way. So this is 3 lots of things, and that puts a hell of a lot of mental strain and stress on the body. And this is why, in interrogations, you keep them going for hours and hours and hours. I'm sure you've seen all the amounts of times where, especially in like cop shows and that kind of thing, where they go, you've asked me this already, we've been going over this for hours. It's deliberately, because if you're lying, you can literally wear a person out until they fall asleep through the amount of stress and because the body uses up to 60% more energy delivering exactly the same thing or doing exactly the same thing under stress as what it would in normal circumstances. So you can wear somebody out to the point of literally passing out through exhaustion very, very quickly if they're lying.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's like I say, the whole topic of studying people's kind of, and I can imagine it being a really useful skill for down to finding out if your kids are sneaking out. And have you been out? Oh no, I haven't. And you can kind of pick up on the tells and that.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah.
what I'll do for your listeners, I'll give them an absolutely brilliant one of my favourite go-tos for if you want to find out, and you might not think this is as effective as it is, but I promise you, this is a wonderful tool, especially for parents. It's what I call a guilt-revealing question. And so my mate, he did this with his kids, and basically, I'll give you the scenario. There's a broken vase and a football in the house, and he's got a boy and a girl, and he puts them in 2 separate rooms. And instead of asking them who did it, he said, what do you think should happen to the person who did that. And of course, the one girl sitting there, she's going, "Oh, no Xbox, grounded for a month, no allowance, no this, no that, punished for that, made to mow the lawn, made to do chores, blah, blah, blah." And he goes to into the room where the lad was, and he says, "Right, what do you think should happen to the person who broke the vase?" And he goes, "I don't know, maybe no more ball in the house." Yeah, you did it. And this exact same, you might think, "Oh, that sounds way too easy. This isn't going to work with adults." I promise you it does. There's been several cases, one in particular I'm going to talk about, where law enforcement had, and again, just for the sake of not getting you problems on certain platforms, a particular individual was accused of doing things that were not very nice towards children. So read between the lines for everybody there, work it out yourself. And he was put in a room, in an interview room, and they asked him exactly the same question. They said, "What do you think should happen to the person who did this to those children?" And he sat there and he went, "Counselling?" Now, any normal person, if you, me, or anybody else was asked, "What do you think should happen to the guy that did this to all these kids?" We'd go, "String them up, set them on fire, jail for life, put them down, shoot them." Whatever. We'd be so angry. We'd be like, "I want that man dealt with and done." Or, if you find him, you catch him, you kill him. So when this guy sat there and went, "Counselling?" You're like, "Yeah, we know you did it." Wow. So that guilt revealing question, what you got to remember is, technically, you're asking them to sentence themselves. And when they sentence themselves, they're going to want to give themselves the most lenient sentence they can.
Yeah, naturally they're going to be more lenient, aren't they? Because
exactly.
I get that. That's good. Yeah, I understand how that would kind of be a good question. Mm-hmm. And certainly for teenagers, that would be a good one. Yeah, so kind of moving forward, obviously you went into the training aspect as well, which I think, how did you kind of, was it a conscious decision? Had you had enough? Was you still kind of working operationally and still doing work, or did you decide
for a while? Yeah,
I want to move to?
So my daughter was born in 2012, and I was still doing like bits and pieces then, and what I'd done whilst in the third trimester of my wife's pregnancy, and I'm still not sure how she did it, but I got the blame. She was the one who wanted to kind of go through the nesting phase and that kind of thing. So we got a little place, and I just took on like a real mundane security job. Right. I'm talking like black tie, white shirt, blue jumper, kind of boring, driving around in a patrol vehicle, checking that buildings are locked up and that kind of thing. Just nobody's doing anything they shouldn't. Run of the mill security. And I did that for a while. And then we had my daughter, and as soon as she was born, I thought, right, that's it. I haven't got to be on the doorstep now. I can be in Sierra Leone, I can be in Australia, I can be in the Maldives, I can be in Canada, I can be wherever the hell I want. Because the most important thing for me was to be there for the birth, and have my wife know I was there for her during the pregnancy. So when my daughter was born, I was still, I then went back to doing, short-term contracts, and I found myself questioning, because obviously, you know the ways of the world. You sometimes you can be in some nasty areas and think, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, that question just started resounding a bit more frequently, and I just thought to myself, I don't want to do it. I still love the industry. I still love what I'm doing. I've still got a passion for it. But do I really want to be doing this crap in this time in the morning, starving, tired, blah 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 blah, and missing my daughter growing up and that? So I started cutting down the amount of contracts I was taking on, and then started looking at, right, what can I do instead? And I got in touch with a friend of mine who runs a close protection training company in Kent, and I just said, hey, do you need any instructors? And he said, with your background, yeah. And so I went on, because he's known me for years, and I still had to go through several different qualifications. So I actually physically had to get like close protection qualifications and teaching training courses and all these different things that I had to do. And then again started off, did it all backwards, started off in the private sector. And the government agencies I'd been working for turned around and said, well, look, we've noticed you're not taking on as much work and you're cutting it right down. What are you doing? And I told them, and they said, well, why don't you come and do that for us? So, okay. Why not? So that was when, so did both private and government training for a while, and done a mixture of both and for quite some time. And class after class after class, again, there's this thing called story-based learning. It's one of the best things in the world when you're teaching somebody, giving people facts they might not necessarily retain, but giving them a novel story to go with it, it makes them remember it and it helps them to then put it into practice when they're doing it in the field. So I used to do a lot of story-based learning with what we were doing in the training. And what that resulted in was time and again, a lot of the students and recruits would say, why don't you write a book? You've got so many great stories, you've got so many great lessons, you've got so much to give. There's so many people who can benefit from what you know. And it's restricted to just us guys in the intelligence or in the private industry. Why don't you write a book and put it out there? And that was the start of my misery as an author.
Well, that leads us on quite nicely. So, yeah, you do have a range of books out. Now, tell us about your first book, which is obviously non-fiction, I believe, and obviously leading on from the conversation, we've just talked about.
Yeah, so the bestseller, the non-fiction, was called How to Tell If Someone Is Lying. And before you start giving me a hard time over the title, it was actually, I know it's boring, it's an awful title, but what it was based on a Google search. And it helped me to beat the algorithms. Everything I did with that book was very, very cleverly done to make sure it became a bestseller. So that was the first thing, How to Tell If Someone Was Lying. There's something like 100,000 people a month on Google search that specific phrase. So I thought, well, that helped me get straight to the top of the list on Amazon. And then there's a mixture of other bits and pieces that I did. I got, a friend from MI6 who wrote the foreword for me. I've got a friend of mine who was a former naval intelligence marine qualified interrogator who worked for the CIA in Guantanamo Bay. She wrote a section for me. I've got a friend. And there was probably about a dozen people who all contributed sections to this book. So what that helped, it was all friends from the intelligence or military community. But what that did is not only gave some brilliant kind of insights in the book, that rather than me just waffling on and then I did this and then I did that, and it's kind of, look at me, aren't I brilliant? It gives some different perspectives and some different experiences. But then at the same time, it also helped me kind of cash in on their audience as well. So people who were following them, when I tagged them in the post to say this is the new book and these are the people who've also already put a bit in it, their followers also wanted to buy the book as well. So all this all helped. Yeah, exactly. So just use a little bit, and what that did, that helped me build a nice big following. So when I released the fiction novel, and again, this is going to lead us into the fiction novel, I'd already got that following there, which ensured that became a bestseller as well.
Ah, brilliant. Yeah, so there is, like I say, you talked about winging it, which I'm no stranger to, but obviously this part of your life and the kind of author and the writing books has been a bit more calculated and probably drawn, a lot from your experiences working for the agencies that you've done, hasn't it?
Yeah. And of course, the type of training that we've had over the years, and any intelligence officers had, it's a lot of it is more the psychological training. I mean, yes, we do. So there is this whole kind of, tactical driving and shooting and all the bits and pieces that you learn and, the physical stuff. But there's even more time spent on the psychological training, the planning and the tactics and the thinking methods and the strategy and whatever else. And again, this is going to lead us on to something that I've got coming up very, very soon. I'm doing a high ticket event towards the end of this year. And what we've done is we've taken the intelligence officer training, which is called IONEC, intelligence officer new entry course, and we've taken that, we've condensed it right down. We've taken out the shooting and the stuff that most people aren't going to need. And we've condensed it right down into a short event in person where we can teach people a different method of thinking, a different technique to look at things from another angle. And I mean, to give you some examples of how I've helped people with this strategy, a friend of mine wanted to buy a house. He'd only got so much savings and kind of didn't know what to do and wanted some advice. I helped him out, and in the end, he ended up with a 4-bedroom house for free. And
I'll watch for your advice as
yeah,
well.
well, I'll chat to you about this after the show. I'll tell you exactly how we did it. And there was some outlay, but obviously because of the money made through the process, it covered the cost of his house, and he ended up with a 4-bedroom house for nothing. There's another guy who I know. He came to me, and again, I'm sure a lot of people can relate. He said, "Gav," he said, "I've got a problem." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I want a Ferrari, but I can't afford a Ferrari." And I said, "Okay, so let's make it happen." So what we did is sat down and I came up with a strategy for him. And if anybody wants to look on my Facebook, they'll see my daughter driving this particular Ferrari around. I changed his angle and way of thinking about it. And I said, what you're looking at, I said, you're looking at it all wrong. You're looking at it as, I want a Ferrari and I can't afford a Ferrari. I said, and you're thinking about how much money you've got and what you can't afford to spend on and blah, blah, blah. I said, instead, think about it the other way. Say, how do I get paid to drive a Ferrari? I said, and when we make that happen, that's when you'll have a happier life. So we figured out a thing where he now does once a month, he does a junior Ferrari driving experience. 12 to 16-year-olds can pay whatever it is, 50 quid or whatever it is, to go and do 2 or 3 laps in this Ferrari. Right, and 50 quid is the basic. There's obviously money you can pay a bit more and do a few more laps. There's the merchandise, there's the catering, there's the photos, the videos, and all the other bits, which are all separate streams of income that covers and whatever else. But he gets around about 100 kids on a Sunday, once a month, paying 50 quid. Well, there's £5 a month he's got coming in. That's covered his insurance, his repayments, and his tyres on his Ferrari for that month. And the other 29 days of the month, he gets to drive around in a Ferrari that's paid for by 1 day a month on a Sunday. And that's it. He's a happy bunny. He now has a Ferrari and gets paid to drive around in a Ferrari. Problem fixed for him. So, and that's just by changing the angle of attack. So, I did the same thing with a friend of mine, got his helicopter license for him because that's what he wanted to do. Another lad who failed miserably at saving enough money to go, every time he got a job, he'd save a certain amount of money. He wanted to go travel in the world, and he'd get a job, lose a job, spend all his savings until he got the next job and start again. And I said, look, let's work this out. Let's change this. Let's get you, instead of you trying to save money and pay to travel the world on your own, let's get you getting paid to travel the world. And he said, okay, how do we do it? So I sorted that for him. So these are all different things and different stories. And there's lots of different examples that I can give you of how I've helped these people achieve what they want to do, achieve their dreams, no matter what it is. And eventually I sat down and I thought, right, instead of people keep coming to me saying, this is my problem, how do I solve it? Why don't I just teach them the tactics I know to have them think in a slightly different way that solves their problem for them, and they can use it and apply it to whatever they want in their life rather than them keep coming to me. So I've decided to put that together and put this event. I've teamed up with a friend from MI6, a friend from CIA, a couple of guys from Mossad and KGB, and we've taken the best of the best training from all the best agencies in the world, condensed it into what people are going to need to give themselves just a fantastic life and an advantage in everything they do.
Wow, that does sound like, I say, you've got agencies there coming together, or former, people from those agencies. Again, if they're going to know how, the mindset and the stuff to get things done, it is them people, isn't it?
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, and we've called it Spy Q. So I think there's a holding page there at the minute until the website goes up, but you can register your interest, and it's simply spy-q.com. Or if you've typed in Gavin Stone Linktree into Google, it's got all the links to all the different, all my different sites on social media and that kind of thing, and I'm pretty sure that's on there as well.
Happy days. Well, it's been fascinating chat with you, Gavin, to be fair. Is there anything else you've got coming up as well as that, or is that your kind of main focus at the minute? Are you in the process of, are you still writing and continuing writing books and stuff?
Yeah, so I've got another book coming out. So the original fiction novel that I wrote, which is called The Unforgiven Spy, is everything in that is based on like first-hand experience. So if it's in that book, I've been through it and done it. Simple as that. There's only one element that isn't, and it's completely fictional, and that's the fact that the main character has his wife and daughter kidnapped. And despite working on K&R cases in the past, I've never had my wife and daughter kidnapped, and hopefully never will. I've offered to pay people to kidnap the wife, but nobody's taking me up on that.
I was waiting for that. I was waiting for that.
So, but in reality, everything else is in there is 100, and the continuity is 100%. If I name a website in there, it's a real website. If I give a code to a door, that's the code to the door. If I talk about a secret military installation somewhere, it exists. So the continuity is 100%. I've done exactly the same with book 2, which is called The Burning Spy. Now, there are things in that which are fabricated, but what I did is I said to myself, right, if I was in this situation, what would I do? So again, there is an element of educated, training-based scenarios. But book 3 to that is coming soon as well, The Hunted Spy, that's on the way. And it's written very, very differently to your normal spy fiction novels. Because what I do is I write the novel, and every so often you'll have these little sections which will go tradecraft, and it'll tell you exactly why we do things a different way, what works, what doesn't work, why we do it, why we don't do it another way, blah, 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 mistakes that are frequently made, absolutely everything. And that's in every area, from whether it's killing people to picking locks to entering a different country, whatever the case may be. These little tradecraft tips are in there. So what you've got, if anybody is a seasoned spy-fi reader, and they know these things, they can flick past them and stick to the story. If anybody is new to the genre, and yourself, you've had people saying, what's this acronym and what's that? And it's all explained for them. And there's even a glossary in the front with all the acronyms and that kind of thing. So you've got all of that, or you can just read it as a field manual if you want and just learn all the spy tricks. So yeah, everything's in there, which I've had some really great feedback from that, and so many people have said, wow, I've learned so much that I didn't know just reading those tradecraft sections throughout your book. And even though it's a different and new style of doing it, I've had a lot of positive feedback from it, so I'm glad people are enjoying it.
No, excellent stuff. And that can be found any good bookstore and online, Amazon. And
yeah, Amazon. It's out in Audible as well, so if you're someone who prefers to listen rather than... The narrator is a guy called Scott Fleming, absolutely brilliant. With the name Fleming, I couldn't say no. And he does a wonderful job of the characters and the individual accents and everything else. So I can't praise him enough for that. And yeah, so you got it's on ebook, audiobook, paperback, and in all the usual big online bookstores and that kind of thing.
Awesome stuff. Well, Gavin, look, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Fascinating insight into kind of working in various kind of government agencies, and obviously the body language stuff analysis. I find that fascinating, and I think a lot of the viewers will find that kind of thing as well really, really fascinating. And again, to the viewers that see this podcast, go out, check out Gav's kind of profiles. They'll all be in the bio, and get yourself a copy of the book. I'm certainly going to get myself a copy. And I'm going to flick through them, pal. So yeah, nice one. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Anytime, pal. You take care.
Hit the ground, no sound but the wind jumped out the sky where the real work begins. Iraq heat, cold steel on the front line, security tight, walking edge of a landmine. Somali seas, deck slick with the salt, eyes sharp, never blink, never halt. Surveillance in the mist, eyes on the prize. UK streets to foreign skies, from fire calls to bare knuckle rings, still fighting demons that memory brings. Oh, Kevin, tune in now, feel the truth get louder. This is the old paratrooper, no powder, no script, no mask, no lies, just facts. Mental health raw in boots or slacks, ADHD to the PTS pain. We're breaking silence, not playing games. Old paratrooper podcast, stay locked in. Stories from the edge where the healing begins. Not a saint, just a voice for the ones who never had a fucking choice. From the wire to the ward, from smoke to the dark, every scar on the soul is a battle mark. Memories haunting, can't shake the past, but together we fight, we stand steadfast. under.